I thought we would try to record this because you may want to see it more than once. And so, to get us off and running, we want to go in your lab manual to exercise 19. And it really doesn't matter, I think, which version of the book you've got. That should be it. And before we can talk about spinal tracts, we have to talk about the spinal cord. And so, without further ado, let us take a look at a few little slides. But while we're looking at these, if you would refer to figure 19.1 or 19.2, depending on which version of the book you got. It's the spinal cord. In the new version, it's on page 313, and in the old version, it's on page 309. Okay? All right. So, a few little tidbits about the spinal cord. And so away we go. All right, now when it comes to the, whoops, this isn't what I want. Oh, land, I got the wrong thing, do I? Just a second, let me hunt. Yes. Okay, well, I got the wrong slide set. As I said, no good deed ever goes unpunished, so it seems. So, let's see what we can find. Alright, so when it comes to the spinal cord and the spinal nerves, alright, the spinal cord begins where the brainstem leaves off. And remember, we talked about this last time. The border is the foramen magnum. So anything that's superior to the foramen magnum is part of the medulla oblongata, that's part of the brainstem. And then anything that is inferior to that foramen magnum is spinal cord. Now, how far down does the spinal cord go? Well, it only goes down as far as the L1, L2 level. That's where it stops. Now, obviously the vertebral canal goes beyond that, and there's something in there, but it's not spinal cord, all right, because that stops about the L1, L2 level. There are 31 segments of spinal nerves that are given off from the spinal cord, and those are going to be named basically for the vertebrae, as we can see from this lovely little model, from which they emerge, and more on that in a bit. All right, there are two enlargements in the spinal cord. There's a cervical enlargement and there's a lumbar enlargement. And those are mentioned there in the diagrams in the book. You'll notice the cervical enlargement in the cervical region and the lumbar enlargement there in the lumbar region. And the reason for the enlargement means it's larger diameter in those areas because there are more nerves emerging from those particular areas than the others. All right, at the end of the spinal cord, so when we're down to about the L1, L2 level, the spinal cord tapers to a point, forming a kind of cone shape, which is called the conus medullaris. So that is at the very end then, if you will, of the spinal cord, the conus medullaris. Now, continuing beyond the conus medullaris is a connective tissue cord. In other words, this will be nothing but collagen fibers, essentially, not nerves. And it forms a thread, a terminal thread, thus filium terminale, because that's really Latin for thread terminal, if you will. And it's just a thin cord of connective tissue that extends from that conus medullaris down to the upper surface of the coccyx. And basically the whole purpose of that is to anchor the spinal cord so it doesn't flop around inside the vertebral canal. Now, what else do we find in that vertebral canal besides the filium terminale? We also have what's called the cauda equina. And if you look there in the diagram in your book, you're going to see that. And the word cauda equina literally means mare's tail. Equina is the feminine form of equus. All right? So, the mare's tail, it looks a lot like a horse's tail. Now, how does a horse's tail look? Long and made up of multiple strands, right? Well, in the case of the cauda equina, it's a large bunch of strands of nerves are really what they are. And those continue on down in the vertebral canal until they reach the level where they need to emerge, and then they come out of the spinal canal, the vertebral canal, and out into the peripheral system. All right, so there we go. Now, if we take a look at this diagram, there we have, if you will, where the spinal cord begins at the foramen magnum and proceeds then inferiorly down to about the level of the L1, L2 level. So we have the cervical enlargement and the lumbar enlargement. Then it tapers down to the conus medullaris where it ends. The filium terminale continues on down to the coccygeal area. And then in here we have that bundle of nerves that continues down in the vertebral canal that's called, of course, the cauda equina, or mare's tail. And periodically then, there will be a pair of nerves emerging then at various levels of the spine as we proceed then toward the coccyx. All right, now, here we have a cross-section of the spinal cord. And to that, if you've got the new version of the book, it's 19.1. And if you got the older version, I don't know what it is. All right, here it is at the top of the page, 19.2 and following. Now, when you take a look at the cross-section of the cord, we have then the anterior side here at the bottom of the screen and the posterior at the top. All right, ventral, dorsal. Remember those terms. All right. Now, one other thing about the cord. It's the opposite of the brain. Because remember, in the case of the brain, gray matter was on the surface, right? And the white matter was beneath it. Well, in the spinal cord, it's just the opposite. The gray matter is in the center, and it's surrounded by the white matter. Now, what's the difference between gray matter and white matter?
White matter is myelinated.
White matter is myelinated, right? Gray matter is not. Now, another big difference that you find here. The white matter are axons in essence, fibers, that are going up and down. They're going up to the brain or they're coming down to the cord. All right? In the gray matter, you find fibers, yes, but you also find in here neuron cell bodies, primarily motor neuron cell bodies in this gray matter. Now, because of the shape of these, it looks sort of butterfly-like, but the term that is used, horns. So we have posterior horns, and we have anterior horns. And really, if we're in the thoracic lumbar area, we can also have lateral horns, but we're not going to deal with those today. Those have to deal with something else other than today's discussion. All right, basically sensory information comes in the back. So sensory impulses enter from the posterior side into these posterior gray horns. Motor information exits out the front. So motor information is going to exit out the anterior horns of the spinal cord. So sensory in the back, motor in the front. Now, attached to this, of course, are going to be roots, if you will, of nerves. So sensory things are coming in here, motor coming out here. Outside of the cord, now remember the brain and spinal cord together are the central nervous system. Outside of the central nervous system, we start to encounter these ganglia. And we have this dorsal root ganglion. There's one on the left and there's one on the right. What is in the dorsal root ganglia? Those are where you find the cell bodies of sensory neurons. All right? And those sensory neurons, as we mentioned in lecture, are unipolar neurons. Okay. So sensory information is coming through axonal fibers into this dorsal root ganglion. The cell body is there. There's then a fiber going into the posterior gray horns, carrying that sensory impulse information into here. All right, any motor impulses generated here in the anterior part, that's going to exit out what's called the ventral root. And when you get out here to the side, the two roots, dorsal and ventral, come together to form the nerve that exits the spinal cord. All right, so there we are. In the center is the gray commissure. That, in essence, is this connection between the right and left halves. And in the middle of the gray commissure is the central canal. And as we mentioned with that last time, what do you find in that central canal in life but cerebrospinal fluid? Right? Simple. Okay, very good. Now here is an actual photomicrograph of a section of spinal cord, the complete section. These would be the white fiber areas. Here are the gray fibers and then the cell bodies of neurons. All right, so there are the posterior horns, anterior horns, gray commissure. There would be the central canal. Over here would be one of the dorsal root ganglia, and here's the other. And these other things that you see around the edge, well, those are the coverings. And the coverings that you find on the spinal cord are the same three coverings that you found on the brain. So what is the outermost covering called? Dura mater, right? And then the middle layer is called the arachnoid, and the innermost layer is called the pia mater. Right. Now what could be simpler than that? And where do you find the cerebrospinal fluid circulating? Which layer? Subarachnoid space. Right. That's exactly right. Okay, so there we go. Now that's pretty simple, I think, is it not? Well, then. Okay. Now, we're not going to deal with spinal reflexes today. That's for later on. So let's move this along a little bit and get to the peripheral nerve structure. Now remember, a peripheral nerve is a nerve outside of the central nervous system. Okay? Now, I think we mentioned this in class, but in any event, there are coverings to the nerves. Remember, essentially what you find within a nerve are axons of neurons. The axons are moving out into the tissues. So we have bundles, really, of axons making up the nerve. And an epineurium is the connective tissue covering for the entire nerve, and it's very similar to what we called an epimysium in the case of a muscle. It's dense connective tissue. It's going to have some blood vessels embedded in it, of course. Then you have bundles of axons into what are called fascicles. Just like you have fascicles of muscle fibers, you can have fascicles of nerve fibers. And these are surrounded by another connective tissue covering called a perineurium. And again, blood vessels are going to be embedded in that. And then each and every axon, each and every fiber is surrounded by a separate little connective tissue covering called an endoneurium. All right, and there you go. Same basic kind of process for naming these coverings as we found in the case of the muscles. All right, and so if we take a look at this diagram, you can see then in the nerve there is, in this peripheral nerve, an epineurium. It covers the whole thing. And then there are these bundles of axons. These would be the fascicles. They would have a perineurium around them. And then the individual fibers will have then an endoneurium surrounding those. And if we go to the next slide, we actually have a scanning electron micrograph of a section of nerve. And you can see we have fascicles of varying sizes in here. These are obviously blood vessels that would be out in the perineurium, and the same here and here. And then each and every one of the fibers is going to have a light connective tissue covering, and that would of course be the endoneurium that you would find in that case. All right, so there we go. Now, when it comes to nerve fibers, they're classified as either being sensory, motor, or mixed. When it comes to peripheral nerves, they're going to be mixed, meaning some of the axons in there are sensory, or sensory nerves, sensory neurons, we should say, and others are for motor neurons. So some of them are axons from sensory neurons, some of them are axons from motor neurons. And they're mixed together in that nerve. So if we go back and look here, those individual axon fibers that you see there, well, some of them are sensory and some of them are motor, because you're going to find packaged up in a peripheral nerve both types of nerve fibers. It's not exclusively one or the other. Now, when it comes to the spinal nerves, there are 31 pairs of these. Now, there's going to be one on the left and one on the right at each level. And the way they're basically named for the vertebra with which they're associated, or, in other words, through which they emerge from the spinal cord and from the vertebral canal. All right, they do originate at the spinal cord, and so you have then coming out of the cord the two roots, dorsal and ventral, that merge together into a single nerve before it actually emerges from the vertebral foramen. Now, what about them? Dorsal roots contain sensory fibers. The cell body for those is in the what? The area outside of the central nervous system that contains cell bodies. Dorsal root ganglion, right? That's where it is. And they connect to the posterior horn of the spinal cord. We've already said that. Ventral roots contain the motor fibers. They arise from the anterior horn where the cell body of the motor neuron is located, in the anterior gray matter or anterior gray horn. And those are going to then, when they pass out, they go to skeletal muscles. Now, the roots pass laterally from the cord and merge to form the nerve, as we've said, and then emerge from the intervertebral foramen. And they are mixed. They have both sensory and motor impulses in them. The length increases typically for those in the cervical region and lumbar region and sacral region. Why? Well, because here you're going to the limbs, either to the arms or to the legs. All right? So obviously they have to be longer. Now, spinal nerves as they emerge. will divide into a couple of what they're called rami. And every single one of them has at least 3 of these. Now, there is a dorsal ramus. Dorsal means what? Toward the back. That's where it's headed. It's going to go toward the muscles and skin on the back. Well, that's not a terribly large area. And if you look in that figure 19.2 in the older version of the book, or 19.1 in the newer version, you will see the dorsal ramus labeled. And actually the labeling in the new version is a little better than the older one, but anyhow, it's there. All right, and that is going toward the back. Now this is actually where it just emerges from the vertebral canal. So there will be a small branch that goes toward the back, that's the dorsal ramus, and then, which is this thing right here, all right? And then the ventral ramus is the one that goes off toward the side and the anterior. Okay, and it's this one, right? Okay, so this is dorsal, this is ventral. Okay, so we have the dorsal one here and the ventral one here. Okay, they've got a label on there, I think. Okay, the dorsal versus the newer version, which has it well labeled. The older one is nastier. All right. Yeah, because you have like, the dorsal one toward the back, and then the ventral one that comes to the side and around, around the side and toward the anterior. All right. Now, there's one other one that isn't shown in the diagram. And that is what's called the meningeal branch, and it's extremely small. And that one goes right back into the vertebral canal and innervates the meninges. And basically the layers of the meninges where there would be a nerve stimulation, or basically it's sensory for the most part, would be the dura mater and the pia mater. The arachnoid typically doesn't have any innervation. All right, so there we go. Now, in the thoracic lumbar area, there can be a 4th ramus, and this is what is called the visceral ramus or visceral branch, and that one goes, as the name implies, to the viscera. Now, what are the viscera? The organs. The thoracic and abdominopelvic organs, all right? And that branch, that one is actually part of the autonomic nervous system, which we're not going to get into today. All right, so there we go. Now, each ramus then mixed nerve fibers other than the visceral one, typically doesn't. Now, I think we've got enough on that, so I don't think we need that, and I like this little diagram right here. All right, so here we are, anterior posterior, or ventral dorsal. All right, there are those posterior horns, anterior horns. This one even shows the lateral ones. All right, here we have the dorsal root ganglion, the dorsal root sensory info coming in. Here we would have the ventral root coming out. That's motor information. All right, here the two merge together as the nerve itself as it emerges from the vertebral canal, and then gives off the various branches. So we have then the dorsal branch that goes around to the back, muscles and skin from the back. The ventral branch that comes around the sides to the anterior part of the body. And then there's a little meningeal branch shown in here, and it doesn't really show where it doubles back in, but in any event, that would be in there to innervate the meninges. And then they also are showing here part of the visceral branch that's coming out and going to the viscera. But we'll worry about that one some other time. And here is another view, which is probably a bit better. It shows more in perspective. And I think you've got a diagram like this in your book. But there we have the cord of the vertebrae. Here is the dorsal root. Here's the ventral one. All right, and then here is the paraventral, and that's the one that's going off to the viscera. Okay, and now for the naming of the nerves. Now, first of all, how many cervical vertebrae are there? 7. But we have 8 cervical pairs of nerves. Well, now how do we manage that? Well, it's very simple. When it comes to the cervical nerves, they're numbered C1 through C8. C1 obviously is the most superior, C8 the most inferior. C1 through C7 emerge superior to the vertebra for which they are named. So in other words, if it's C1 through C7, they're emerging from the canal above the vertebra for which they are named. All right? When you get down to C7, there will also be a pair of nerves that emerges below or inferior to the C7 vertebra. So the C7 vertebra is a twofer. It's got one above and one below. One pair above and one pair below. That's how you get 8 cervical vertebrae. Now, from here on down, all the rest, the pair of nerves emerge inferiorly to the vertebra for which they're named. Or I guess you could say inferiorly to their namesake. All right, so now, how many thoracic vertebrae do you have?
12.
And you therefore have 12 pairs of thoracic nerves. Now, isn't that clever? All right, now, next, lumbar. How many vertebrae?
5.
And how many pairs of lumbar nerves? 5. All right. Now, did somebody doubt that? I didn't hear what they said. All right. Sacrum, how many vertebrae? 5 fused. Well, we have 5 pairs of sacral nerves, S1 through S5. And then finally, when it comes to the coccyx, how many bones there? 3 to 5 bones, but only 1 pair of nerves. And they're numbered C sub 0, which distinguishes them from cervical, which is also abbreviated C. Now, isn't that clever? All right, so you add it up, and you've got 31 pairs of spinal nerves emerging from the column. Now, what would have been about the last pair to actually come off the cord as they emerge from the vertebral column? Where does the spinal cord stop?
Thoracic 7.
It's lower than that. About L1, L2. All right, so about the first or second lumbar nerves would be about the last to come directly off the spinal cord. What about anything lower than that? What about L3, 4, 5, S1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or CO? Well, those would have been in the column, in the vertebral canal, as part of the cauda equina. Okay? So they stay in there. So, for example, S1 stays in the vertebral canal until it reaches the S1 level, and then it emerges from the vertebral column. Okay? So it would have been part of that cauda equina. Now that's simple, isn't it? Heaven. All right, so here we go. So here we have a nice little diagram. You can find this something similar in your lab book. C1 through C8, T1 to 12, L1 to 5, S1 to 5, and CO. There they are. All right? shown emerging from the vertebral canal. Remember, C1 through C7, superior to the namesake, if you will, vertebra. C8 below the C7 vertebra, and everything else from there on down, thoracic 1 on down, also the same, emerges inferior to the vertebra for which it's named. Okay? Now, that's simple, isn't it? Yes! But let's trash it up a bit. And let's talk about plexes. Now, I like that name, don't you? It's almost like a complex. It'll give you a complex. No, it won't. It's easy. Now, we're going to simplify it. Now, a nerve plexus is an interlacing nerve network that's formed by mixing together fibers from more than one spinal nerve. Sounds intriguing, doesn't it? Well, it really is. And then the plexus is going to give rise to specific nerves that pass on to areas of the body. All right, now, if we take a look at the diagram, and in this new version of the book, it's on page 317, and let's see what we get in the older version. Let's see. It's on like page 313, okay? And in the older version, it's figure 19.6. And in the newer version, it's figure 19.7. I thought these things all had the same number, but they don't. All right, well anyhow, there we go. Now, what happens, of course, is this. If you take a look at that cervical plexus, and this is the first one we're going to look at, it lies in the neck, and it's formed by branches coming from the C1 through C4 nerves. All right, now if you take a look at the diagram, you notice there's C1, 2, 3, 4, okay? You see how the fibers come out of those cervical nerves and then kind of get redistributed. They get kind of mixed together in combinations, and then they give rise to other nerves coming off. And for example there, you can see the supraclavicular nerves. You find those? The supraclavicular nerves there. All right, now you follow those back. What do you notice? You notice there are fibers in that are coming out of at least C3 and 4, and to be honest, there are probably fibers in there that are coming out of C1, 2, 3, and 4. All right? Now, what would be the use of putting things together like that? Well, that way, if C1, for example, was cut, then the areas served by those supraclavicular nerves, over the clavicle, would still be serviced. There would still be fibers reaching that part of the body because there are fibers in there from other nerves. All right? So it's like the area is not really being paralyzed. Now, here's one where it's really vital. The phrenic nerve. Now, the phrenic nerve is the one that supplies the diaphragm. Now, why is the diaphragm important? So you can breathe. Now, in the phrenic nerve are fibers that come out of C3, 4, and 5. All right, now, let's suppose someone's C3 on the left side was cut. But 4 and 5 are still there on the left, and on the right, you still have all 3, 4, and 5 intact. Would that person still be able to breathe? Would they be able to use their diaphragm? Yes, because there still would be nerve fibers reaching the diaphragm through the phrenic nerve. Now, the ones that would have come from the left C3, no, they're not going to work, but there's backups available. And that's the whole idea here. All right? Rather clever of Mother Nature, don't you think? A backup system, a redundant system. So if one spinal nerve is cut, there are still going to be fibers reaching a part of the body. You know, it's not like you've cut all the nerves that go to that part of the body and it's paralyzed. All right? For the most part. Now, cervical plexes. Now we can have the brachial plexes. Now, these are basically going to form nerves that go into the arms. All right? So, which nerves are involved in forming the brachial plexus? C5, 6, 7, 8, and T1. All right? Now, those are going to give rise to nerves that come down into the arm. So like the radial nerve and the ulnar nerve and so on. Those are going to have fibers really coming out of all of those. Those are going to have fibers coming out of all of those spinal nerves. So it's not like if you cut C5, your arm is now paralyzed, right? There are other fibers getting down to those nerves and causing innervation of the muscles. So you move them, all right? And so there we go. All right, now that's simple, isn't it? So the cervical plexus is the one that gives rise to the phrenic nerve that supplies the diaphragm, right? And the brachial plexus is the one that gives rise to the nerves that follow, take care of the chest and the arms, all right? Now that's simple, isn't it? And we'll simplify it even more. The lumbosacral plexus. Now where does this one start? Well, fibers coming out of T12, L1 through L5, S1 through S5, and C sub 0. In other words, everything from T12, including T12 on down, is going to form that lumbosacral plexus. And fibers out of the lumbosacral plexus then go on to supply, well, basically everything in the lower part of the body. The lower abdominal wall, the external genitalia, the buttocks, the thighs, the legs, the feet, you name it. There you go. So those nerves, like the sciatic nerve, the longest one in the body, is coming out of that lumbosacral plexus. And now who wants to be brave enough to come up here in the video, because I'm going to set it here where it can be seen, and point out for us the sciatic notch. And let me get the thing put down here so we can show it. All right, could we have a volunteer come and point out the sciatic notch for us? Or must I do it myself? Swear what a bunch of cowards. All right, right there it is. Okay, what's this thing called that projects out here? I may have asked that on the lab practical, I can't remember. No, I didn't ask it, but I have in the past. The ischial spine, right? Well, here's the sciatic notch. Why do you think it's called the sciatic notch? The sciatic nerve runs through that. Yes, now isn't that simple? Good heavens. Good heavens. All right. We'll put her there and say thank you for coming. All right, let's get back to the slide set, or as it's also known, the sleeping pill. All right, oh, I got to move this back a bit. Okay, so there we go. All right, so there we have the plexes. Now, they're not going to complicate your life, are they? I should hope not. All right, now that's simple. So you should now be fairly well keyed into the spinal cord. Now, here's one other little thing. I don't exactly like the way I stated that, but here's another thing to keep in mind. Which nerves are not involved in plexus formation? T2 to T11. Yes. Now, the outline may have a mistake in it, but it's T2 through T11 are not involved in plexus formation. Everything else is. All right? All the others are. There you go. Now that's pretty simple, is it not? Good heavens, yes. And here we have, on the left side of the diagram, you can see the plexes, and you can see then that nerves are arising from the plexes. And that's the whole idea, is to redistribute fibers so that given nerves contain fibers from several different spinal nerves. Okay? Well, now I think, we don't need to get into that, I think it's time to switch gears and talk about spinal tracts, which is the main thing for today's adventure. So, for that, let us bring up another set of goodies. Okay. Yes. Now, there's something else I want to put up here first. All right, that's okay. We'll come back to that in a bit. All right, let's talk about spinal tracts. Now, these are cake when you get down to it. The whole idea with a tract is this. It is a way of communicating between the brain and some part of the body. All right? And so we can have what we call ascending tracts. Well, now, what does ascending anything mean? Which direction are things going? Up. All right? Well, if they're ascending, I will bet you could not guess in a million years what kind of information they convey. Is it sensory or is it motor? It's sensory because it's coming from somewhere in the body and it's destined for the brain. It's destined for the central nervous system. It's going up to the brain. All right. And then we have descending tracts. Well, those are going to start in the brain. They're going to go down through the cord, and they're going to pass out to some area in the body. Those are going to be carrying motor impulses. All right? So if they're ascending tracts, they're sensory. If they're descending tracts, they're motor. Now, I don't think that should cause any degree of consternation for anyone. Now, how are they named? Well, there's going to be anterior, posterior, lateral. That's going to be on there. What does that refer to? It refers to what part of the cord the tracts move. If they're anterior, they're going up and down in the white matter there on the anterior side of the spinal cord. If they're lateral, it's off to the sides, up and down. Remember the white matter, primarily fibers that are going up to the brain or down somewhere into the cord. And if they're posterior, obviously they're back there in that vesiculus cuneatus or vesiculus gracilis, and we're not even going to worry about those. Now, here is an example name. Let's dissect it. Spinothalamic. All right? It tells you where it starts, the first part of the word, where it starts, second part, where it ends. All right? So, if it's a spinothalamic tract, it starts in the spinal cord, it ends in the thalamus. Now, where is the thalamus? In the brain, right? It's that area right the lateral walls of the third ventricle are formed by the thalamus. All right? Spinothalamic. I wonder, is that ascending or descending? Mine is ascending, that's right. So if it's ascending, what kind of information is it conveying? Sensory, of course. Now see how easy that is? It gives it away. The name tells you. All right? Now that's simple. All right? Well, now, let's take a look at this little diagram. Now, I don't know how many of you printed them off. I meant to tell you to bring a cache, but since you maybe only have one or two, I made 30 copies. So you can parcel them out. You're all probably going to want 2 or 3 of them anyway, so kind of pass them around. And I don't know, maybe I have a few extras somewhere. Let me see, I think I may have some extras. Well, I thought I did, but I don't see them. There may be some laying around the room. I don't know. We can get more if we need them, but anyhow, I think there's enough to go around. All right, now let me show you what's what. All right, now obviously that represents a coronal slice of brain, right? And that would represent the thalamus, okay? That area, those are part of the thalamus. That line would represent, that double line, that's the corpus callosum, okay? Now, this next thing, that is the medulla oblongata. That's what that would be representing. And then this would be like a section of cord in the area of the cervical enlargement. Okay? Area of the cord in the area of the cervical enlargement. And this would be a cross-section of the cord below that cervical enlargement. Now that's essentially what all this refers to. Okay? Brain, medulla oblongata, which is of course brainstem, and then cervical enlargement, area of the cord below the cervical enlargement. So we're going to be drawing on these things in a bit. And of course, out here on the surface, well, that would represent the cortex, right? The cerebral cortex. And if we're thinking in terms of the sensory cortex, where is it? What lobe is it on? Now let's think of our landmarks we talked about last time. You see these two gyri, the red one and the blue one in between the two? The central sulcus. What does the central sulcus divide? Frontal lobe, parietal lobe. All right, the red one, that is the primary motor cortex, the precentral gyrus, located on which lobe? Yep. Dark blue, that is the primary sensory cortex. What lobe is it on? Parietal lobe, right. Postcentral gyrus. Now, you know, those would make nice little questions one of these days, I'll bet. All right. Now, let's take a look at some example tracks and see how easy these are. All right, let's look at some ascending tracks first. Now, we have two that we want to look at. Oh, we're in good shape on time. Two that we want to look at. First one, an anterior spinothalamic tract. Anterior spinothalamic. Now, anterior refers to the part of the cord through which it either goes up or down. Now, if we're calling it anterior, where is it traveling in the cord? it's going to be traveling in the anterior part. So like here or here, right? All right. Now, spinothalamic. It starts somewhere in the cord at some level. It goes up to the thalamus. All right? Now, what that means is there's going to be one neuron that goes from the spinal cord level where this enters up to the thalamus. Now, you'll see here in a bit. All right? Now, if it is sensory, where does it enter the cord? On the dorsal or ventral side? Sensory. Dorsal. Remember, it's coming through the dorsal root ganglion. That's where the cell body is for that first sensory neuron. Enters into the posterior gray horn of the cord. Now, here's another word that you can use in dinner conversation. It decussates, or in other words, crosses over, in the cord. It crosses from left to right to left, at the level of the cord where it entered. Now, here you got to remember if things cross or don't, and where they cross, if they do. All the ones we're going to look at today cross. Just remember where. And it's either going to be in the cord or it's going to be in the medulla. And you don't have to worry about that just yet. All right, crosses over the cord, then goes to the thalamus. Now from the thalamus we need to have another neuron to relay the information out to the primary sensory cortex so we can interpret and localize what the sensation was. And where did we say the primary sensory cortex is located? On the post-central gyrus of the parietal lobe of the brain. Now, because things cross, if you touch something with, say, your left hand, it's going to register on the right side of the brain. Okay? Well, see, that's easy. All right. Now, let's take a look at this, and then we're going to draw it for ourselves. All right? So now, let's cut the lights a bit, and I think this will show. These colors are a little wishy-washy. This is not out of your book, so it's from another source. So anyhow, here we go. All right, now remember, don't forget, when you do your diagram, I would label it with the anatomic right and left to keep you straight. So, right, left, okay? Because remember, we have to put this down with the anatomical right and left. Now, what we're saying here is light touch or pressure. Now, that's exactly what this anterior spinothalamic thing works on. All right? So, if it's touch or pressure somewhere on the body, it's going to ascend to the brain by an anterior spinothalamic tract. All right, so here in blue, we have a sensory neuron coming into the dorsal root, passing through that dorsal root ganglion, because there's the cell body for the cell, for the neuron, and it comes into the posterior gray horn of the cord, where it synapses or connects with a second neuron that's done in red. Now this is the spinothalamic part, because it starts in the spine and it's going to end in the thalamus. Alright, now what happens? The axon of that second neuron crosses from right to left and then ascends in the anterior white matter column of the cord up to the thalamus. There it ends, where it synapses with a third neuron that carries the impulse out to the primary sensory cortex where it can be interpreted and localized. All right? So how many neurons were involved in this thing? 3. 1, 2, 3. 3 neurons, all right? And in fact, on the diagram, they're calling it first order, second order, third order, okay? All right, now that's pretty simple, I think, is it not? All right, well, are you ready to draw it? Yes, you are. All right. Oops. Now, since this projects the brain off the thing, I brought a little something else in with me. I won't keep it up there. Probably won't have to. Yeah, I'll just have to hold it. All right. Well, anyhow, let's do this. Let's suppose that you have touched something with your right hand. Okay? And so we've got the sensation of touch. All right? That is being conveyed by way of a sensory neuron to the cord. Now, if we're doing the hand thing, let's use the cervical enlargement part here. For one thing, it's bigger. It's so easier to draw. And we said it's going to happen on the right. Okay? So now, here's what we need to draw in. Remember, we have that dorsal root, the dorsal root ganglion. Okay? And then we need to put in a ventral root. And then remember, the two merge together and form the spinal nerve. So what level of the cord are we entering? Well, the cervical region, right? Why? Well, if I'm touching something with my right hand, you know, the nerves that are conveying that sense back are passing through that cervical plexus, right? And the cervical plexus is fed from nerve fibers in the cervical region of the body. Okay? Right? That seem reasonable? Is it too late in the day to think? I don't know, I just want to sit there staring in space. Does it seem reasonable to be one of the cervical nerves, right? Cervical plexus, that makes sense? Okay. All right, now, here we go. So we've got this sensory nerve coming in, going into the dorsal root, coming into the posterior gray horn. There's the cell body for it, because remember, these sensory nerves are typically unipolar neurons. Okay? Now, here in this posterior gray horn of the spinal cord, we find that it synapses with the cell body of another neuron, and this is going to be essentially a multipolar neuron. And that axon is now going to cross from right to left, and it's going to travel in the anterior column, anterior white matter column of the spinal cord up to the thalamus. All right, there it is. Now, oh, I need another marker. I should tape this thing up here. Oh, but I'll get it on. All right, yeah, there we go. All right, now, spinothalamic. Now, what's going to happen once it gets up here? it's going to synapse with the third order neuron, again, another multipolar neuron. And the axon for that one's going to head right out to the primary sensory cortex.
Does it matter where it passes through?
Alright, now what do you mean where it passes through?
Like how you drew it, does it matter, like is it always going to be on that side or?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, if it went straight up here, no, that would be okay. That would be okay. Alright? Alright, and there you go. Now, how many neurons did it take? 3. You have the sensory neuron coming into the cord, synapsing here in the posterior gray matter column, with the second neuron, that's the spinothalamic neuron, because it's starting here in the cord, crosses in the cord, ascends to the thalamus, alright, stops there, where it synapses with the third neuron that carries the impulse out to the primary sensory cortex on the brain. Alright? Now, and where is it sensed on the brain? It's on the left side. Remember, it crossed, started on the right, ends up on the left. Okay? Anatomical right and left, remember. Okay. Now that's simple, isn't it? Isn't it? Well, now get your drawings ready. I'm coming around to inspect. I want to make sure that you get it right. Well, you know, I wouldn't be at all shocked, surprised, or amazed if when it's time for the lab practical, you got to draw one of these for me. And you know how picky I can be. Very nice.
This is the anterior sinus element, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And don't forget you need to go from here out. Okay.
Thank you. Brain.
Excellent. Excellent. Very nice, very nice, very nice, very nice.
One of the bumpy things.
Picture quality. One more to go. Oh, no, it's yellow.
Where
It's hard to
at,
see.
where at both is this?
It's not.
I thought you said it was.
No, it's not. Okay, there we go. There we go. It may be in the lecture text. It's not in this stuff. But it's not these things, because this is from somewhere else. Yeah, I copied from lots of sources. All right. There we go. Okay, very nice. Well, it's really coming out. If you think of 3 dimensions, it's kind of coming straight up through that anterior, one of those anterior funicular columns. All right. In the white matter, yes. Yeah, because there are the fibers of the white matter fibers and then cord are going straight up and down. All right, so they're like columns, you might think.
Oh, we learned how to be.
And yeah, it travels in these columns. So, yeah. Okay, so I think everybody's got it. All right, now that one's pretty simple, right? All right, now let's just kind of sum up again. We're looking here at, as we said, an anterior spinothalamic. I'm going to put the screen down now. Anterior spinothalamic tract. What kind of information is it conveying? It's either touch or pressure. All right, it conducts through a sensory nerve to the cord. It's going to obviously enter where the cell body of the nerve is in that dorsal root ganglion. It enters into the posterior gray horn of the cord. It then crosses of the cord and conducts up the anterior column to the thalamus, where it synapses with a third neuron that carries the impulse out to the primary sensory cortex, where it can be localized and interpreted. So you know that you touch something, say, with your right hand. On where on your right hand? end, actually. You know, you can be that specific. Now, this is where the primary sensory cortex comes in, because if for some reason that third neuron was not there, or it was damaged, all you would get is a generalized sense of touch. The thalamus can't localize where things are happening, but it can register as a vague sense. So you would know that something's touching you somewhere on the body, but you really don't know where or what. Okay? If that third neuron were damaged or destroyed. All right. Now, lateral spinothalamic. Now let's dissect the name before we do any drawing. Lateral refers to what? Sides of the spinal cord. All right? So these are going to go through the white matter that's out on the side of the spinal cord. Not in the front, but out on the side. Now, spinothalamic. Where does it start? Spinal cord. Where does it end? Thalamus. And if it is a spinothalamic tract, is it ascending or descending? Which means what kind of information is it carrying? Sensory. Correct. Now, what about this? This is going to be pain or temperature on the skin. Pain or temperature. All right? Enters the spinal nerve, goes to the spinal gray cord on the posterior horns as before. Now, crosses where? In the cord. All right? And it crosses over to the lateral column this time rather than an anterior column, and conducts up the lateral column to the thalamus, where it will then synapse with a third neuron to again carry it out to the primary sensory cortex. All right, now let's take a look at this version. Then we're going to draw our own. All right. So once again, we're starting out on the right side. All right. Now they actually put in 3 sensory neurons. 1 is sufficient. I think this is overkill. All right, but there probably will be more than 1 picking up the impulse. Cell body here in the dorsal root ganglion. All right, comes into the posterior gray horn here on the right side, where it synapses with that second neuron, and this again is the spinothalamic part. All right, because the cell body's here in the spinal cord. All right, it then crosses, it actually goes to the gray commissure over here to the lateral column, and then ascends the lateral column up to the thalamus, where it then synapses with a third neuron, carries it out to the primary sensory cortex. All right? Lateral spinothalamic tract. All right? Well, with that thought in mind, let's see if we can draw this one. Now, let me try something different. Maybe I just best not. I think we better stick with the old tried and true. Alright, so I'll erase that. And I'll erase that. I don't really do much erasing. Alright, now, this time, I'm going to change this. Alright, this time, I'm going to keep with my right side. But I'm going to step on a piece of broken glass, or maybe a rusty nail would be better, with my right foot. Pain, pain. All right. So now, we're going to be down here this time. Because what level of the spinal cord is the impulse going to enter now? What level? Yeah, it's coming out of my right foot. The lumbosacral plexus, all right, the nerve, the sciatic nerve, probably involved here, coming up and sending fibers through that lumbosacral plexus. Well, what level of cord do you want to pick? Well, now, let's be honest. Where are we? Where's the cord end? Lumbar. All right? So we're probably somewhere in the lumbar area. The cord is where this is going to enter the cord. Right? That seem reasonable? Well, you think about it. I think it will be eventually. Now, I know you're tired, but anyhow. All right. So here we go. Sensory neuron comes in with the cell body in. It synapses with the spinothalamic neuron here in the spinal cord. Cell body here. Now, we said this is a lateral spinothalamic, right? So the axon comes across the gray commissure into the lateral white matter column, where it ascends and remember now, when you go through this one, stay over here on the side. All right, and then up to the thalamus. And synapse with the third neuron, cell body here in the thalamus. Out it goes to the primary sensory cortex, and there it ends. Well, that was simple, wasn't it? All right. Now, cross to the cord from right to left, ascends in the white column on the side, the lateral columns, up to the thalamus, and then from there, third neuron, in red in this case, carries it out somewhere onto the primary sensory cortex, so it can be localized and interpreted as ouch. All right, there you go. Touch and pressure, anterior spinothalamic. Temperature or pain, lateral spinothalamic. Okay? Now that's simple, isn't it? Yes. There's nothing complicated about that. All right. Now, let me have a quick look at your drawings. All right. Very good. Van Gogh would have been proud. Now, just make sure you keep this open.
Okay.
Okay. Yes, Picasso would like that. Okay, very nice. Very nice. Yes. Yes. Yep. Okay. Very good. Yes, yes. Oh, very nice. I know that yellow. Yeah, that's okay. I can see it. Okay, that's good, that's good.
I feel like.
Very good. Yep, excellent. Well, I think we've got it. Okay. Now. Oh, thought I put the screen down. All right, so we've done now some sensory ones where we've got them going up. They're ascending to the brain. All right. Now, we're going to do some others. Now, let's see here. Don't worry about these posterior column ones. Just don't worry about them. Let's move on. We're not going to worry about spinocerebellar either. We're going to move on to these. And these are descending tracts. And these, of course, are going to start in the brain and they're going to end up in the spinal cord. So they're going to be motor information this time. All right, if they're descending, it's referring to motor info. The pyramidal business, multipolar neurons, which have kind of a pyramidal shape. That's where that name comes from. But don't worry about it. Descending tract is what we want to focus on. All right, first one, lateral corticospinal. All right, now let's dissect the name. Lateral tells us what? It's going to be moving in columns of white matter over on the sides, lateral columns. Corticospinal. Where does it start? Cortex. Motor cortex. Where does it end? Spinal cord. All right? Definitely descending. Starts the cortex and ends the cords coming down. That's motor information. All right, now, what's it about? Conducting motor impulses from the motor cortex to skeletal muscles. Where is the primary motor cortex located in the brain? Precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe. Okay? Now, impulses originate cerebral motor cortex. Impulses cross over in the medulla oblongata this time. So, if you're moving something on the left, it originated on the right or vice versa. All right, impulses pass down the lateral columns of the cord, fiber synapse with motor neurons in the cord that are located in the anterior gray horn and exit the cord through the ventral root this time, okay, and pass out to the appropriate muscles. All right, now, got it all? Lateral corticospinal. And since my short-term memory is not what it used to be, I'm going to write down lateral corticospinal so I don't forget. All right. Well, the other day I forgot which one I was doing. I came back and looked. Anyhow, let's take a look at their diagram, which is awful, and then we'll do our own. Ours will be much better, I can assure you. All right, so here is how they did it. All right, now the motor cortex somewhere up here on the cortex. Now, you notice that it's really just two neurons are used this time. There's one starts on the cortex and comes all the way down to the cord. All right. Now, this was the lateral corticospinal. All right, so it starts up here somewhere, it comes down to the medulla and crosses, goes down the lateral columns, enters the gray matter on the anterior side where it synapses with the second neuron, and the axon of that passes out through the ventral root of the nerve. Now, we're going to do our own, which will be much nicer, I can assure you. So, let's go back to our diagram. And, I don't know, what do you want to move this time? You want to move your foot? Oh, let's do dorsiflexion of the foot, of the right foot. Okay? All right. Well, let's see, where's the cat for that thing go? I don't know. I'll find it later. All right, so where do we start? Well, we start up on the cortex. Now, if we want to move the right foot, which side of the brain am I going to start on? On the left. All right, so over here somewhere on the left, we're going to, I'll put it here. All right, there's the neuron. Now, when you come down through here, make sure that you stay out of the thalamus, because remember what's the thalamus involved with? It's involved with sensory material, sensory impulses. These are motor. And we want to come through this area out here where those basal nuclei are, because they're concerned with fine motor movement. So we come down through here, and we come down to the medulla. Now, what do we have to do in the medulla? This time we cross over, and since we're a lateral corticospinal, when we come into the cord, we want to stay on the side here. All right, and then I want to bring it down again here on the side, and then come into the gray matter here on the anterior horn, and it's there in the anterior horn where I'm going to synapse. Oh, that thing's hacked. Let's see. There. All right, there we're going to synapse with the second neuron, and the axon for it is going to exit through the ventral root and head out to the muscle that we want to move. So how many neurons were involved this time? Just two. Corticospinal. Start on the motor cortex, go down to the spinal cord to stop. Where does this one cross? Medulla. And it travels through the lateral white fiber columns of the spinal cord. Okay? Simple. All right, and of course then that would travel out to get down to the foot. And if you're doing dorsiflexion, what muscle would you need to innervate? What's one of the biggies that you would need to use here? Gastrocnemius, right? Now, what level of the cord are we exiting to get down there? Well, probably the lumbar region, right? Because that's where the cord ends. And we go down through one of those nerves that gives rise to that lovely, lumbosacral plexus, and conducts probably through the sciatic nerve down to get to the gastrocnemius to get it to contract, right? Take my word for it. You can think about it later. I know you're all tired and weary, but so am I. Now, we got one more to go. It's easy. Well, they've all been easy. What's the biggest thing you got to remember? Where it crosses, right? Well, those sensory ones are both crossed where? In the spinal cord. This is the only one you're going to have that crosses the medulla. The next one will cross the cord too. Just gave away a store. All right, there we go. All right, better pick that up where I don't want it coming down on the head. All right, so there we go. All right. Now that isn't hard, is it? No, it isn't when you're not so tired and weary, I know. But anyhow, oh, I got to put the screen now. See, I'm even forgetting to do things. Shame, shame, shame. All right. All right, back to the salt mines we go. So the next one we have is what's called an anterior corticospinal tract. Anterior corticospinal tract. All right, dissection time. Anterior tells us what? Travels in the anterior white columns of the cord. Corticospinal tells us, where does it start? Cortex, where does it end? Spinal cord. All right, and is it ascending or descending? Descending, therefore it's motor, right? So which part of the cortex does it start in? Motor cortex, right? Okay. Now, what happens here? We're conducting motor impulses from the motor cortex to skeletal muscles of the neck and part of the trunk. All right? Impulses originate on the cerebral motor cortex, no shock there. Impulses pass down the anterior columns of the spinal cord and then cross over in the cord. And once again, since we're wanting to innervate muscles to get them to move, we're going to cross over in the cord and go to the anterior gray horns, where we're going to synapse with a motor neuron cell body that's going to then carry the impulse out to the appropriate muscles. Now, if we are wanting to cause movement of muscles in the neck or in the trunk part of the body, where are we probably going to exit the cord? At what level would you suspect you would want to exit the cord? Cervical, I think would be a good bet, don't you? You might even go so far as T1. I wouldn't go any further. Because, there we go. And I'd say let's go with the cervical. That's the most sensible in this case. We don't need to really get into the brachial plexus, I don't think. So, yeah. I can back it up from here. Come on. Back up, back up. Ah! There we go. Alright, so if we're going to do cervical, then that's the one we want to use. Alright, now let's see here. Seems like we use that right side a lot. Let's come out on the left side this time. Okay. Alright, now, if I want to come out on the left side, I really need to start on the right side of the brain. But before I do that, I'd probably better do this. Go ahead and put in my dorsal root and my ventral root. Okay. Alright, and we'll do it that way. Okay, now, okay. So I think we're ready to go. Alright, so over here, we want to go corticospinal, so let's start there. There's the cell body on the motor cortex, and it's going to come down through the medulla. Now this is an anterior, right? So we're going to come down over here into the anterior, oops, I messed up, travels in the anterior column, and it crosses in the cord So I'm going to cross over this way into that anterior gray matter and put in my second neuron cell body there and exit the cord through the ventral root. And there it is. So 2 neurons do it. Oh, wait a minute. I guess what am I thinking? I should continue on here for heaven's sake. All right, here we go. It's been a long day. All right, so there we are. Corticospinal. It crosses in the cord. All right, and it is a anterior corticospinal, so it travels in these anterior columns of the spinal cord. It crosses in the cord. We only need 2 neurons to do it. And there it is. Now, what could be simpler than that? All right, because remember now, what are we moving here? We're moving muscles either in the neck or the thorax. Okay? So really most of the motor impulses to muscles use the lateral spinothalamic tract. Okay? All right, well, I think, I better not trust that, I'm crashing down. All right, because after all, Dr. Hedrick was nice enough to loan that to me. I won't tell you what I did yesterday about it. It was naughty. But anyhow, I was afraid the paint would peel off, but luckily it didn't. All right, thankfully. The saints were interceding for us. All right, so I think that pretty well gets the ones we want. So the only ones we really had, we had 2 ascendings and 2 descendings. And the rest, if we didn't cover them, you don't need to worry about them, okay? They make for edifying reading, but when it comes time for the practical, the 4 that we drew are the ones you should be able to draw. Now, I will do it one of 2 ways. I'll either have it drawn with questions for you to answer, or I'll tell you what's happening and you draw it for me. Now you can do either one, can't you? Yes. Next week is our last regular lab. Oh, what a good time all the time. Last regular lab, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to start off by dissecting the eyeball. And here's another case where you want to keep your mouth shut when you're cutting because things do squirt out. And then we're going to look at special senses. So we've got sight, we've got hearing, and we may do some things with taste and smell as well. I think we probably will. Because I'm largely going to take care of special senses in here. And then we'll see if we can review the tracts and the spinal cord a little bit. And then you'll be all ready to go off and have Thanksgiving break. And I'm not going to tell you don't overeat because everybody always does. And then when we come back from Thanksgiving break, that Wednesday we come back is our final lab practical. And I'll have more to say about it next week. I haven't given it a lot of thought yet. There aren't a lot of dissection things this time. I mean, all we really dissect your brains and eyeballs. So I'll have to have more models and drawings and stuff like that. And we've also got some diagrams too. There's eyes and brains and things. Bring them. We'll label. We'll go over that next time too. I think there's one with the spinal cord. Yeah. And they're on the web page. You can print them. Bring them next time. And we'll just have a fun time, as we always do. Won't we? Haven't lied yet, have I? Don't answer. All right. Well, I think you've suffered enough.